What's up guys? So today I'm going to be showing you how to make your very own life cast the very cheap at-home way. Doing an actual life cast with alginate and all that stuff is very difficult in general, and it's almost impossible to do it on yourself if you can do it at all. Either way, I would not advise trying it. This is the next best choice. It is a lot cheaper and a lot more readily available. So this is not a perfect cast of my face. The eyes are a bit wonky because I'm not putting plaster over my eyeballs. There is some roughness of the texture of the skin, some little bubble holes, which can be fixed pretty easily, but it's good for what I need it for. So I don't know about you guys, but I kind of like having my eyebrows and my hairline and the rest of my face. So the very first thing I'm doing is taking Vaseline and putting that all over my face, and especially focusing on my hairline and my eyebrows. If you don't put Vaseline down, you're gonna have a really painful experience, so just please do that. So I am cutting up plaster wrap. Then to activate the plaster, I am dipping it in water and then applying it to my face, making sure to smooth it down as well as I can. The only parts of my face that I'm not covering in plaster are my eyes and my nostrils because I want to be able to see and I want to be able to breathe. Now when it comes to making this negative mold, you really want to make sure you are being smart about the type of plaster wrap you are choosing. This specific brand I'm using is one called Rigid Wrap, and they specifically state on the packaging that it is safe to use on your face. It even has instructions on how to do it safely. This is a type of wrap that is meant for this. Don't just grab any sort of plaster wrap, and you especially don't want to mix up your own plaster and put that on because that will probably burn you. Just be smart about how you're doing this and read the packaging. Then I'm applying bigger strips just to reinforce that first layer because I don't want it to bend or rip when taking it off. And speaking of taking it off, all you gotta do to do that is to move your face around. Start moving your eyebrows, your mouth, your jaw, make a bunch of weird expressions, and it will surely come off. Now if I were to try and pour plaster in this right now, it wouldn't work since it would just fall through the eye holes and the nostrils. So we gotta fix that. To do that, I'm just taking smaller pieces of plaster wrap and covering those areas and kind of shaping it into a similar shape as those facial features. So for the nostrils, I'm using a spatula and kind of sticking it up there so it creates an indent. And then for the eyes, I'm just making sure it's not dipping inwards. Then I'm just doing one last round of big plaster strips to further reinforce it, because the plaster of Paris we're going to pour in it later on is going to be rather heavy and I don't want this to get warped and deformed. So this is where we're at right now. The negative mold is complete and I'm going to let it sit overnight just to make sure it's fully hardened and dry, because it's about midnight right now. If you started this in the morning, you could probably do this in one day, but I just want to be super cautious. So we're going to let this dry overnight and then we will come back to it in the morning. It is a new day and this thing is fully hardened, so it's time to pour the actual cast. This part is super easy. First, I am applying Vaseline to the entirety of the inside of the negative mold, and I'm doing so very liberally because I don't know about you, but personally I'd rather not have the plaster merge into one piece with the negative. Once it's all vazzed up, I'm just pouring some plaster of Paris that I mixed up. I didn't have a big enough container to mix enough plaster for just one pour, so I had to do it multiple times. And I'm very impatient when mixing things, so it became more and more watery. That's okay, if your ratios are off, then it'll just take longer to dry or be a little bit more chunky depending. Okay, I am covered in plaster now, but that's gonna sit dry for another day, maybe two, just until it's completely dry. And then we'll come back and see the final thing. It is a new day, probably like 3 or 4 days since I poured it, just because I was out of town for a few days, had some other stuff to do, but now we're back and we can peel this off. To peel it off, I'm not being overly cautious, but I'm not being super reckless with it either, just because I don't want to break it. It should come off fairly easy. If you got plaster on the shell while you're pouring, it might be a little bit difficult, but you should still be able to get it off. If it doesn't budge at all, you didn't use enough Vaseline, and good luck with that, my friend. Okay, so I scraped off all of the extra bandage pieces that were stuck to it using a spatula. And now I'm just going to take some sandpaper and clean up any bumps and lumps on it. So we're almost done. Okay, so I finished sanding it, and this is what we are left with. So this looks pretty good. There are a couple spots where there's some divots and holes. That's just because either there's air bubbles in the plaster or the bandages got a little bunched up, which is really easy to fix because you can just mix up a little bit of extra plaster, pour it in those little sections, let it dry, and then sand it back down. I'll most definitely be doing that later, but this is what we have for now. So hopefully you guys found this useful. If you want to see more videos with this sort of thing or makeups related to it, then hit the subscribe button to be told when those happen, and I will see you guys later. Goodbye!